Hello all, and welcome to the final of the 3 topic lectures about entertainment on gladiators and the amphitheater. Gladiatorial combat in the Roman amphitheater is one of the most enduring images of ancient Rome, and also one of the most misunderstood. Like the Romans' reputation for decadence and luxury, which is based on exaggerated descriptions of atypical aristocrats and emperors, gladiatorial combat has given the Romans a reputation as bloodthirsty and cruel. It is vital, however, to understand that the context of the games and carefully examine the gladiatorial combat before passing moral judgment upon the Romans. Gladiatorial combat was associated originally not with religious holidays like the Ludi Circenses and Skyniki, but rather with funeral ceremonies. The term for these games was munus, plural munera, which connoted a duty or obligation as well as a gift. This memorial tribute to the deceased became something the crowd expected to be included in the usual funeral ceremonies. By the late Republic, the munera had become very popular with the lower classes, a fact not lost upon the aristocrats. As a result, the games lost their connection with aristocratic funerals and became another facet of aristocratic competition for honor and support. During the imperial period, the games tended to celebrate the emperor and his family and were often held on important imperial anniversaries or birthdays. The origins of the munera and funeral ceremonies have led to a great deal of confusion regarding the purpose of gladiatorial combat. The reality, however, would seem to be that gladiators were not a form of human sacrifice, even in their origins. Instead, gladiatorial combat originated as a violent, sometimes deadly reenactment of the deceased battle prowess. The passage here from Valerius Maximus describes how 2 brothers put on the first gladiatorial show at the funeral of their senatorial father in 264 BCE. It states the first gladiator show in Rome was given in the Forum Boarium in the consulship of Appius Claudius and Quintus Fulvius, 264 BCE. Marcus and Decimus, the sons of Brutus Pera, gave the games to honor their father's ashes with a funeral memorial. An athletic contest was held at the same time at the expense of Marcus Scaurus. Similar shows were held on an ad hoc basis throughout the Middle Republic when someone wanted to embellish the funeral of an illustrious person. In 50 BCE, Caesar, stretching the applicability of the munera, gave a show in honor of his daughter Julia, who had died several years earlier. Harvey number 332 states, Julius Caesar announced a gladiator show for the people as well as a public banquet in the memory of his daughter Julia. No one had ever done this before. Several things raised people's expectations, but some rumors about the banquet got the most attention. It was circulated that supplies for the dinner were being arranged by Caesar's own household. Caesar's games came at an important political time, his invasion of Italy at the beginning of the civil war with Pompey. Indeed, these games won him vital popular support at a politically unstable time. The Christian author Tertullian, who was opposed to violent amphitheatrical events, claims that the battles were blood offerings to the gods of the underworld. This misconception has endured into the modern era, bringing with it the idea that gladiators were relics of ritualized human sacrifice. Tertullian says, it remains for me to discuss that most notable and popular of spectacles. It is called a munus because it is derived from official duty. Therefore, it can be called an official duty or munus. Our ancestors thought that with this spectacle they were fulfilling their duties. It was only later that they spoiled the munus with the kind of civilized atrocity. At one time, because there was a belief that the souls of the departed were appeased with human sacrifice, the Romans would sacrifice prisoners of war or slaves of bad character as part of funeral rites. Later, they thought they could cover up the wickedness of this act by calling it entertainment. Gradually, these games grew in sophistication to match their cruelty. In Harvey number 334, Valerius Maximus speaks of the connections between gladiatorial games and the military. He says, many authors, including some older sources, say that the giving of gladiatorial shows before going out to war was a ritual made against the enemy so that Nemesis, that is, the avenging power of fortune, would satiate herself with the blood of citizens being spilled in something that was reminiscent of battle. Others say in their works something that I believe is closer to the truth, that the Romans before going to war thought it was a good idea to see battle, wounds, iron, and naked bodies struggling against one another, so that in actual battle they would not be so afraid of the armed enemy or wounds and blood. The connection of the games with the military might also hint at gladiatorial combat as an inspirational battle spectacle for a warlike society. The abundance of gladiatorial graffiti from Pompeii reflects the enormous popularity of the gladiatorial shows in that city. Extant graffiti include drawings of gladiators and gladiatorial combat, poems describing gladiators, and perhaps most importantly, advertisements put up by aristocrats paying for the games, including Harvey number 335, which states 30 pairs of gladiators belonging to Decimus Lucretius Satirius Valens, priest for the life of Nero, son of the emperor, and 10 pairs belonging to his son Decimus Lucretius Valens, will fight at Pompeii on April 8th through 13th. There will be a beast hunt and awnings. Aemilius Keller wrote this alone by the light of the moon. In addition to naming the person paying for the games, the Munerius, and the number of gladiators to appear, the document also mentions how a morning beast show will be included and awnings to provide shelter from the sun. Games were clearly an important way for aristocrats to earn popularity in their hometown. This inscription comes from the tomb of an aristocrat from the town of Paestum in southern Italy. It commemorates money he spent on games for his town, and says, after the state had given him 25,000 sestertii to hire gladiators for the munera, he added another 25,000 to hire even better gladiators. He also added some bears of amazing size, as well as criminals, along with all of the required apparatus and amenities. His preparations made the day memorable. So now let's move on to amphitheaters, or where gladiatorial combat would happen. The map on your screen shows a lot of the amphitheaters from around the Roman Empire in the 2nd century CE. Some amphitheaters were large in stone, like Rome's Colosseum, but others were much smaller, wooden structures that don't survive today and were more apt for local games. The amphitheater was the specific location of the munera. The amphitheater was oval in shape with an arena at the center and seating on all sides. The term arena is derived from the word for sand, harena, which covered the wooden floor of the amphitheater. Before the prohibition on permanent entertainment buildings had been lifted, the munera in Rome were held in wooden structures in the Forum or the Campus Martius. Like the small covered theater in town, the amphitheater of Pompeii was constructed in the 1st century BCE, shortly after Sulla founded the veterans colony in the town. The builders constructed the amphitheater against the angle in the city wall in the southeastern quarter of town, which enabled them to use the existing masonry as support for tiers and seating. The arena was also partially sunk into the ground so that some seating could be constructed at ground level. An additional tier of seating was created, however, with ramps leading from the exterior ground level up to the top of the amphitheater seating. The following is the dedicatory inscription from the 2 entrances into the amphitheater. They state, Gaius Quintius Valgus, son of Gaius, and Marcus Porcius, son of Marcus, the duo weary with censorial powers, for the sake of bringing honor to the colony of Pompeii, saw to the construction of this entertainment building with their own money and gave it as a gift to the townspeople forever. In 59 CE, a riot broke out during the shows in the Pompeii amphitheater between the townspeople and visitors from the nearby Nuceria, which Tacitus gives us a recollection of at Harvey number 339. It states, around the same time, a violent event between the townspeople of Nuceria and Pompeii occurred over trivial matters. The competitive spirits of the people of the towns began with jeers and then turned to throwing of rocks and eventually the seizing of weapons. In the battle that followed, the Pompeians had the advantage because the spectacle had taken place in their town. The mutilated bodies of many of the dead Nucerians were sent to Rome. Many mourned the loss of their parents or children. When Nero in Rome investigated, he punished the local magistrates and the man responsible for holding the games during which the riot occurred. He also banned the holding of games in Pompeii for 10 years. Tacitus recalls, as I already said, these riots. But the main place that everyone thinks of when they think of gladiators is, of course, the Colosseum in Rome. The Flavian emperors built the Colosseum after their victory in the Civil War of 69 CE on ground that Nero had appropriated for his new private palace, the Golden House, Domus Aurea. Building started in 72 AD and was completed by 80 AD. The structure resembles closely that of the Augustan Theater of Marcellus, with seating on artificial tiers supported by impressive Roman-style column arcades and vaults. While the Theater of Marcellus had only 2 tiers, the Colosseum had 3 and could seat 50,000 spectators. Some entrances led to the prestigious seats on the lower levels, while staircases led to the upper floors and galleries. Like every other amphitheater, it had a floor of sand to soak up the blood, and underneath the floor was cages for beasts, mechanical elevators, and a drain. The wooden floor of the Colosseum has long since disappeared to expose the substructures that house the various professionals and animals awaiting their turn before the crowds, which you can see here towards the bottom of the screen. The poet Martial was alive and writing poetry when the Flavian Amphitheater / Colosseum was completed. He was so in awe of the building that he dedicated many poems to the building. One is excerpted here on your screen. Let Egyptian Memphis stop talking about the wonder of the pyramids. The Assyrians should not boast about their efforts with the city of Babylon. Don't praise the Ionians for their temple of Diana of the 3 ways. The altar with all the decorations should not be the main attraction on the island of Delos. The Carians should not immodestly brag to the stars about the tomb of Mausolus as it hangs in the empty air. All of those fall short to the glory of the new amphitheater the emperor has built. History will only remember this one magnificent work and forget the rest. And now on to the people who would fight in the amphitheater, the gladiators. Like other professional Roman entertainers, gladiators were of the lowest social standing simply by virtue of their profession, equivalent to slaves or slaves themselves. Despite their low social status, however, gladiators were often extremely popular. The chance for popularity attracted even freeborn people to the profession. Such persons of non-servile status wishing to fight as gladiators were required to swear an oath to the Munerius, saying that their bodies and lives were at his discretion in an act that essentially brought the low status of slaves upon themselves. Even aristocrats would stoop to this level in search of fame. One of the attractions of gladiatorial combat was the variety of types of combatants with different weapons and armor. Usually combat took place between gladiators of different types. You can see how proud different types of gladiators were about what type of gladiator they were in the epitaphs in Harvey 341. Your book gives a long list of different types of gladiators, but you only need to know 3. The first is the Murmillo. He was a big, strong man that wore a crested helmet, a large shield, and an arm guard, and he was armed with a sword and protected with one leg greave. The long shield was supposed to protect his other leg. The second is the Thracian, or Thrax in Latin. He was also a big, strong man and wore a small shield, a short sword that was intended to maim an opponent's unarmored back, greaves which were necessitated by the smallness of his shield, and helmet with side plume, visor, and high crest. And the final type of gladiator you need to know is the Retiarius. Unlike the other 2, he was a small, nimble man, which was necessary due to his relative lack of equipment. He was only equipped with a net, trident, and sometimes a dagger. Gladiators weren't just thrown into the ring untrained. They lived and trained in what were known as ludi, or gladiatorial schools. On your screen now is the remains of the Ludus Magnus, the greatest gladiatorial training camp in Rome. It is situated directly east of the Colosseum and was connected to the Colosseum by tunnels. These places were essentially an arena where gladiators from across the Roman Empire would live, eat, and practice while undergoing gladiatorial training in preparation for fighting at the gladiatorial games held in the Colosseum. There was such a stigma attached to gladiatorial combat that laws had to be passed to prevent aristocrats from performing the games. The text quoted here is a law from the reign of Tiberius, preserved in the town of Larinum, Italy. It documents the penalties for members of the upper classes who sullied the prestige of their class by hiring themselves out as entertainers. The text in your book is quite long, so I've excerpted a little bit here. It says, in early years, senatorial decrees had prohibited such action because the performances diminished the majesty of the Senate. On this matter, the Senate decreed that no son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, great-grandson, or great-granddaughter, or any male whose father or grandfather, maternal or paternal, or brother had ever received the privilege of watching the games from the seats of the equestrians, or any female whose father or grandfather, maternal or paternal, or brother had reached the same status. All such people are prohibited from performing on the stage, taking up the equipment of a gladiator, serving as a trainer, and doing anything of a similar kind. Gladiatorial combat was a one-on-one contest in which the combatants were expected to put on a good show of skill. Death was not the point of the contest. Gladiators of similar skill were pitted against one another. When one of the gladiators realized that he was beaten, he threw away his shield, raised his index finger, or both, in order to indicate to the referee that he wished to yield and end the contest. The referee then immediately jumped in to restrain the victorious gladiator from dealing a mortal blow to his vanquished and now unprotected opponent. It was then that the Munerius who decided if the life of the defeated gladiator should be spared. It was also traditional for the Munerius to look into the crowd for help to making this decision. Death was not the typical outcome of gladiatorial combat. Because the contest was meant to be a show of skill, death was reserved for the defeated gladiator who did not measure up to the expectations of the Munerius or the crowd. Death would naturally follow a cowardly or otherwise disgraceful performance. It is very likely that a defeated gladiator would be spared and released. Seneca in Harvey number 343 says that it was disgraceful for a gladiator to be matched with an obviously inferior opponent. This funerary inscription commemorates a gladiator named Urbicus. The end of this text includes the unusual advice that a gladiator should kill any opponent that he defeats. This inscription reads, "To the spirits of the dead, to Urbicus, top-ranked secutor in his school from Florence. He fought 13 times and lived to be 22 years old. Olympias' daughter, who was only 5 months old when he died, and his other daughter Fortuensis and his wife Laricia made this for her well-deserving father and husband. Urbicus and Laricia were married for 7 years. I warn my fellow gladiators to kill anyone they may have defeated. His fans will honor his memory." This may reflect an unwritten code of conduct during gladiatorial combat in which gladiators expected each other to fight bravely in order to win the contest, but not to fight in such a way as to inflict serious injury or death upon their opponent. Urbicus may have spared his opponent only not to receive the same treatment later, probably from the same person he had spared. This small selection from the third satire of Juvenal is our only evidence for the hand gesture used to indicate a decision for death. It states, "At one time, these people were low-class trumpeters and frequent spectators at the amphitheatrical events in local towns. Their horn blowing was known in those little towns. Now they are rich and give games of their own. In their effort to win popular support, they give the sentence of death to any gladiator the people ask with the turn of their thumb. After making a show of themselves at their games, they return to doing their contract work for public latrines." Contrary to common modern belief, choosing to spare the gladiator's life was not signaled by a thumbs up and giving him death by thumbs down. Juvenal refers only to how the mob would order the death of the gladiator with a turned thumb, vetere pollicem. He does not specify whether the thumb was turned up or down. It is most likely that the person making the signal would turn his thumb and jab it toward his own throat. This is because they would simultaneously shout "ugula," throat, while making this gesture. Harvey number 346 documents an experienced gladiator from Sicily, including wins, losses, and draws. It states, "Flama the Secutor lived 30 years, fought 34 times, won 21 times, fought to a draw 9 times, received missio 4 times from Syria. Delicatus, his companion in arms, made this for him." The Latin term for a draw is stans missus, released standing. If the battle went on for some time, it was customary to declare a draw with no clear winner. In that case, both gladiators were stantes missi. While a battle between two well-matched gladiators that resulted in both being stantes missi may have given a great show, the lack of a winner was undoubtedly disappointing to many spectators. The result was a kind of battle called sine missione, or without release. Sometimes this term has been interpreted as a battle to the death in which the defeated gladiator would die without an appeal for life or death. In fact, the term referred simply to a contest for which there must be a clear winner. A draw was not a possible outcome. Martial describes a sine missione battle in his poem about the Colosseum, which states, "While Priscus and Verus drew out their contest, and the battle raged for a long time, equally for both of them. The people shouted loudly for both men to be given missio. Caesar, however, obeyed his own rule. Indeed, the rule was, the fight must continue until the finger is raised and the shield is thrown away. The emperor even tried to entice one side or the other to surrender by frequently offering platters of money and other gifts. At last, they found a fitting end to their equal contest. They fought as equals, and they conceded as equals. However, as Harvey number 348 shows, through the epitaphs of two gladiators, death did sometimes take place in the arena. Gladiatorial battles were violent, and sometimes gladiators were punished for a lack of performance with death. Deceived commonly appears on gladiatorial tomb inscriptions as a euphemism for death. It is interesting that many of these types of inscriptions attribute gladiators' failure in the arena to being deceived by fate.